Welcome to each and every one of you to our Sunday service here at Ananda. My name is Nayaswami Pranaba, and this is Nayaswami Parvati, and currently we reside at Ananda Village. I say currently because you never know the karma of anyone's life anymore. So, I'd like to read to you from Paramhansa Yogananda's book of Prayer Demands, Whispers from Eternity. O all-pervading Spirit, the breeze of thy inspiration has removed every cloud from my heart. The firmament of my mind is now clear. Purified, I behold only thee everywhere. The sunshine of thy joy spreads rapidly to the farthest shores of my being. After long ages of hunger, I feed on thy light. By thy grace and by my constant wakefulness in thee, may this joy be mine forever, forever, and forever. A few years ago, or a number of years ago, I was taking a trip to Michigan to do some programs for our groups for Ananda there. And Parvati was going with me to Sacramento from Ananda Village, so the next morning early I was going to fly out. And this spring storm started to come in to the area of Ananda Village. Real intense spring, late spring storm, at the end of April actually. And it was just a lot of clouds and then suddenly a lot of hail that became a lot of slush. It started to make the roads dangerous. And so we escaped a little bit early. But as we were driving out of Nevada City, going south and somewhat west, I looked back in the rearview mirror and I saw how menacing the darkness was. If you know your Lord of the Rings stories, it's a remindfulness of the land of Mordor. You know, there's just this menacing darkness that was just intense, and it filled the landscape to the east and to the north. I mean, like a whole wall of this darkness. And yet, where we were going, first south and then west, it was clear blue skies. It was like there were completely two separate realities. And luckily, we were going towards the blue skies. But it was so allegorical in its presentation that it's really what happens all the time. It was just more dramatic as a way to understand it, to see it. But in our lives, there always is this pull of darkness that we identify with the little self of who we are, based in our ego, based in our contractiveness. But if we just turn towards the light, if we just turn towards that expansiveness, then it is clear blue skies. It's not like the storm disappears from our lives. It's still there. But it doesn't control who we are and doesn't control our destiny. It's like, you know, you can say a lot of phrases in different ways. And I think the phrase, oh my God, is typically said, oh my God, sort of as a reactive process. I mean, we all say that probably when something abrupt or challenging happens. Oh my God. And yet, the very same words, said from a more inner centeredness, sounds more like, oh my God. Where it's an embrace of that energy, but it's coming from where we're in our center rather than in our periphery, that we're more connected in that way. Well, meditation, of course, I think for most of us, we know the experience that it gives us to come in more into that center. But it's nice to understand that not only with meditation, but in the way that we proceed with our mindfulness, in the way that we proceed forward in our lives with the qualities we want to engender more of in our lives, things will go in that direction. Whatever we feed ourselves, we will take that on more and more as our identification. And the research that's happened in the last few decades, especially in the last decade, on meditation and what really happens to us is thrilling. It's exhilarating to understand it from that perspective, as well as the one that, of course, we have the tradition of many centuries of what meditation is for us. But the idea that when we do meditate, when we construct our lives with thoughts that draw in God, whatever form we feel that's important to us, whether it's more of a impersonal way of experiencing that or more personal. But the more that we combine this meditation and our constructive thoughts towards something of God, God becomes more real. And what they've found in studies is that when God becomes real to people, it's not only the thoughts of a divine experience, it's the feeling that grows of that divine experience. In other words, our whole being is set up to nurture that experience more and more as being real. Now, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the verse that David read from the reading today, that those that approach the divine with impure motives will never reach that experience. If you come to it, really what it's saying in a more practical level for all of us, is that if we're coming to it from an attitude of getting something for myself, for my ego to impress myself, to be in that way of understanding it, then it's already elusive. It's already not going to be our experience. We need to come at it with an openness, with a sense of offering. The idea of offering ourselves is both mysterious to us at times, but very practical. It's very, very real as a practical technique of opening ourselves. Now you can apply that to even mundane experiences. When you think of learning a new skill, whether it's maybe in athletic endeavors or job training or personal relationships that you're trying to move forward with a new approach, that the more that we offer ourselves into that experience from the beginning, and we really connect with that intention of offering more and more, then it's much more readily accessible to us to become what we're offering ourselves into. The separation from us offering to where we're trying to go starts to dissipate. And we start to feel we are the experience that's unfolding rather than trying to get to some point along the way. I remember in the years when I first started to connect with Ananda, I'd been meditating for 4 or 5 years prior to coming to Ananda. And I had been exposed and was tuning into the Hatha yoga postures on my own. But one of the first books that I purchased from Ananda, I was living up in Canada, which is just north of here. And I know you've all heard the joke about you can move to Cape Breton if something happens in November. But anyways, if you haven't heard that, forget it. It's something Justin Trudeau and Obama laughed about at the first state dinner that a Canadian Prime Minister in 19 years has attended in this country, and they laughed about the potential of what could happen in November, that some people may want to go up north. But when I was in Canada, I purchased one of the first books I purchased of Swami Kriyananda's was Yoga Postures for Self-Awareness. It's now called Ananda Yoga for Higher Awareness. But I delved into it, and it was interesting because if you know Ananda Yoga, it includes the emphasis of using mental affirmations with the yoga postures. And I dove into it because I really trusted that this was a good thing. But my reality of my experience was somewhere else. It felt like I was simply imposing a mental phrase while I was desperately trying to get into a yoga posture. So here I was just struggling to get past my knees with my hands and saying something like, nothing on earth can hold me. Well, it felt like that was the least of my concerns. I just didn't want to just burst my tendons, But I just continued. And somehow, maybe it was the way that Swami Kriyananda wrote the book, I'm sure that, and his vibration in the book, that I tapped into this idea of offering. That, okay, I'm not going to just do these yoga postures. I'm going to open up. So started working with fuller breathing, diaphragmatic fuller breathing. Started to just get into a sense of release in that experience. And then I would work still just on this mental platform of using these mental affirmations. Then it wasn't long afterwards, I would say maybe a few months doing it in this way, that this deep experience came to me, that I felt so profoundly that the affirmations weren't something I was mentally saying, but the experience of my consciousness in tune with what the energy flow was in that yoga posture stretch. It was like the dovetail joint came together. If you know anything about carpentry, if you don't, I'll explain to you, that a dovetail joint is a common joint to bring a right angle together, typically a right angle of two pieces of wood, without using nails and typically without even glue. And it's formed by having these little parts of each one that fit into the other, and it's called a dovetail. It just dovetails together. Well, the strength of that is quite impressive. And it was like that for me, that the strength of the connection of the yoga postures in that body energy awareness with this awareness of consciousness in my mind really brought together this powerful experience. And then I knew for sure it wasn't about doing the postures, it was becoming more in tune with the flow of what was happening through the postures. Now, you still have to use mechanics, you still have to, it's good to learn how to get in and out of the postures and how to really focus in that way. But that becomes the medium of us to be able to go into that depth of that experience. And it's really like that, because you see many people that have practiced Hatha Yoga postures for years perhaps, that are still on that physical level only. And again, granted, it's a great boon even on that level. But it's robbing us of really what's trying to happen unless we allow ourselves to go deeper in that. Because the essence of all of yoga, and indeed the essence of all of life, is not to just give us experiences, but as I said earlier, that we become the experience itself. And that is really, in a sense, what these readings are tuning into. That if we're at the heart of our experience and offering ourselves to deepening that awareness of that experience, then we have the beauty of that already in that moment. And then what we're doing is we're carrying through from that experience. I know when Parvi and I started our center in Texas, we first started in Austin, and then later on in Dallas, Texas. And there's still a strong center in Dallas, and now we've got a growing group again in Austin, Texas. But there was a fellow, as a part of the congregation in Dallas, that was really into Frisbees. And he taught a course at Southern Methodist University called Synergy, and his main tool was Frisbees. And it was just so surprising what he came up with and how he utilized it. Because some people, if they're not used to throwing Frisbees, end up just kind of crooking it and it just goes around in this little circle. It sort of spins out. And he was so patient, so calm and patient with people. He said, just become centered, and he really did this as if it was a yoga posture. Center yourself within. Make sure that you're comfortable in that center. Lift the chest, open up, breathe deeply, and then just let the Frisbee be that part of you that's just going to extend out. And he said, just hold it up here easily, and then just let it go and follow through. He said it's the follow through that creates really what's going to happen in that experience. So instead of, I forget what the name for Frisbee football is called, where you basically have teams and you pass the Frisbee and you try to score. He never actually wanted to do that in his classes. because he didn't want to deal with competitiveness. So his game was always keeping the Frisbee always off the ground and tossing it in a big group of people. So it would always be that you were releasing it and someone was receiving it. And it was just so yogic. It was so amazing. But you could see the transition of someone that felt like a dud in throwing a Frisbee, a half hour later, just being in this grace. It sort of looked like Tai Chi or Qigong or even the energization. It was just this flow out from that person because they had come to the experience who they were. And that Frisbee being thrown, as he said, my friend, it was just that extension. And it always, for the most part, did the right thing. But it was so sweet to see something so practical coming from that experience of offering. Well, in our way of thinking of what's going on in our lives, if we hold to being positive in how we're relating to life, things start to become positive. They have done some studies where if you act from being kind and caring, the world will reflect that in time. It will open up to that experience. I remember I did this experiment when we were directing Ananda up in Portland. You may think I'm giving you a travelogue here, but when we were up in Portland, I had to go to downtown Portland, and every downtown in any city is vibrant in a very intense, anxious way. And this was lunchtime, and I thought, I'm just going to do this experiment. I'm going to just walk down a busy street where people were bouncing each other and trying to get somewhere before their lunch hour was over. And I'm just going to look directly at someone, whether they were looking at me or looking at the ground, busily moving along. I was just going to smile. Not so much that even I'd necessarily do a physical smile. I would just try to tune into smiling from my heart and through my eyes. And if I smiled with my lips and my face, that was great. But it was very interesting because, again, a lot of people were walking, definitely pointing their eyes down and moving in this very anxious way. But I would just beam at them, and almost everyone, not everyone, would suddenly, almost as if they were coming right to me, would lift their eyes and see me, and they would smile back. And apparently there have been studies that have validated, substantiated that same thing. I didn't know anything about that at the time. But the environment around us will start to reflect the energy, the offering that we bring from ourselves. Not artificially trying to do it with a cheesy smile, but even that actually does work apparently. But for our sake, to do it with a smile, as I said, that comes from the heart and reflects through the sparkle of your eyes in the way that's there for you as a real experience. Because the more that we're activating that in ourselves, we don't have to wait for the result of that other person to smile. We are already fulfilled in that experience. But it does have this effect, which is also significant, of touching other people. And it becomes where we just become a vibrant being of that light, being a child of light. We just are that more and more. And so that even if we're not aware intentionally of creating an effect on others, we have that effect. The power of that grace is just able to flow more freely. When I was doing the yoga postures, as I said earlier, this feeling that this consciousness was more and more my own. It was more a feeling. But the interesting thing over the years, so that was, some 38, 39 years ago, that I had that experience. And I've done yoga postures every day since then. And there's one posture, one asana that I do every day called halasana, which is the plow pose. And so you're lying flat on your back in the corpse position, and you raise your legs up and then swing your legs over the torso, and so your knees are above your eyes. And then then you can bring your toes down behind your head on the floor. Well, I've done this pose pretty much every day for all those years. Maybe I've missed a dozen or so days. But even to this day, there are times when it's quite easy to let those toes come back all that way. And other days, it's not even close. And I've been doing this every day. And I was thinking about it more recently. Because otherwise, if I can't reach down, I'll just float my legs, support my back a little bit more with my hands so that I'm not stressing my body, but getting still that stretch, but not as full through the length of the spine as I would if I had my toes down. But I realize it doesn't concern me where my toes are. It really doesn't matter. Because I was trying to be more in the experience, whatever was happening. And in that flow, I was successful in offering and opening up to that. So because in the beginning I was kind of thinking, why can't I? Come on, toes, get down there. And I knew the moment I pushed in that direction, it created the opposite effect. There was more tension, more resistance. And that's the truth. If we force the body, it will create a payback of tension. It's just what happens. And so the nurturing effect of being in the experience, I didn't have to worry about how far I went in that pose that day. It was sufficient. And maybe that's a really poor word. It was magnetic to be in that experience, whatever it was physically, because of that flow of energy and awakening to that. But you can transpose that into really every situation in your life. That if you're in that experience and there's some tension, there's some sense of, again, that those land of Mordor is grabbing you and pulling you into that darkness. Really all we need to do is bring our awareness to our center, find the ways, and there are many techniques that we have that Yogananda taught us to bring us into that centeredness. And again, it doesn't mean you have to be completely centered or completely out of center. All we need to do is find the direction towards that centeredness from this moment in time. Whether our toes touch the floor or they're up in midair, if we're moving in that direction, rather than thinking, well, I can't do that, this is what's real for me. No, the reality, what's really real, is that we keep the flow of energy opening, that it's expansive, that it's magnetic. And we start to feel that that light isn't something that's outside of ourselves, but is indeed the reality of who we are. And so when that starts to happen, we start to really feel that in the midst of the challenges, it's even more conducive to us as we become aware of it to bring more light. It's almost as like the tensions, the challenges, the darkness encourages us to draw even more light. I know this is part of the travelogue as well, that for a while, years ago, I felt inclined to work with our publishing house, Crystal Clarity Publishers at Ananda, and go out when there were more bookstores than East-West Bookstore. Nowadays, East-West is a unique expression of independent bookstores, but back then there were many more. This was some 20 years ago. And often we didn't have the budget to allow me to stay in other than those $30 rough and tumble motel rooms throughout the country. And Biraj knows about this, he's done some of that. But it was interesting that in some of these places, it created even more of my focus to meditate more deeply. So I always made sure I set up an altar in these motel rooms. But it was like, because it was not in that great a setting, but as all we could deal with, I didn't want to just put a tent up in the park. And so that difference in where the reality of what was going on to where I was moving started to dissipate. That gap started to diminish. And I was feeling even more joy of just I'm there to bring light in my own life. And then the rest of the day, seeing if that light could shine into other people's lives. Whether it was a book buyer at a bookstore or whatever it was that my life brought me that day. But just to open up, to realize that the light itself animated me. The light itself was me. And in that light, instead of saying, "Oh my God," I could say, and I invite you to all in your own lives to really reflect on, "Oh my God, my beloved, I am yours, thou art mine." Let's take a moment to meditate.